Hello, good evening everyone. I'm writer coach Tony, and tonight I'm going to answer a question sent over by um, one of my one of the people who was able to see my videos. No? His name is Fernando Cartagena. I'm not sure if it's his real name. Anyway, his question is, may I ask what are the pitfalls of qualitative research? And how is qualitative research applied using the mixed method approach? So there are two questions. I'm going to answer each one of them. And I'll begin with the pitfalls of qualitative research. Um, Qualitative research is when you do research where you have to interview people or can do case studies. So basically, your sample is much smaller than when you do a when, as compared to doing a quantitative research methodology. So the usual case here, it can be applied. The common cases here are my students usually interview principals or teachers. Usually, I ask them to limit it to at least between 3 to 8 people, because the more the more people you interview, the less time you might have to do your analysis, because the analysis part is the most crucial. So usually I ask them to do at most 3 to 5, or if they have more time, they can do 3 to 8. No, depending on how many questions they have to answer and how lengthy their statement of the problem is. But there are still problems to qualitative research, especially when I check their results. No, the most common is lack of focus. Now, number one, there's a lack of focus because this happens if usually if I let the researcher if I leave the researcher on their own. So what I usually do, I make sure that the statement of the problem is very clear, and that all the questions in the interview questions of the researcher matches precisely what the statement of the problem has to answer. The idea here is to make sure that when the researcher analyzes the results, the answers do not lack focus. So they zero in on what they should be answering. So the key to prevent the lack of focus is to make sure that your questions answer precisely what your statement of the problem is. Otherwise, there might be a possibility of lack of focus. It can also happen that there is lack of focus even if the questions are very clear. That's where the failure of analysis comes in. Now, sometimes the problem with qualitative analysis is that sometimes the interviewer gives a lot of data. So with so much data, um, the researcher, when he or she does her analysis, they get lost, no, along the way, and they fail to focus on what has to be answered. So um, the thing that we can do there is for them is to just let them focus on answering the statement of the problem. So number one problem with doing qualitative analysis, one number one pitfall is lack of focus. Second is the use of jargon. No, this happens especially when you talk to interviewees who also use jargon. Um, Jargon is words that appear sophisticated or important, but are actually not providing adequate definition to a certain um, to your research. No, so I cannot think of specific examples right now, but um, sometimes the interviewer, to impress the researcher, they use jargon, no? Words that seem important, that to impress the researcher. So the researcher, when they submit their analysis, they put some of this jargon inside, which is what you have to do actually. Whatever especially if you're using coding data, the code that the interviewee uses, you have to take it down. No, which words do they always use? Which words do the interviewees use most often? So these words will come out, and sometimes they can be jargon. No, so jargon which may not be very helpful to your study. How do we classify it as jargon? Sometimes these are words which um, do not really help, no, with the definition of your statement of the problem. Sometimes there can be insufficient sample. Um, Though this happens when your data is not very um, full, no? Parang kulang yung data mo. Hindi siya ganun ka compelling. No, I mean, sometimes you do research and then the results come out and then they are like, oh, so anong bago? I mean, you're doing research to find out new information, and then you end up with the same results, no, with other studies. This can happen, no, in qualitative analysis, especially if the quality of your interviewees is not very high. That's why I always ask for a short list of the people to be interviewed, because I want to know the quality. Kasi pag hindi quality yung interviewin mo, if the people you are going to interview for the qualitative analysis is not it's not of good quality, the answers they might provide you will also be of poor quality, no? So it's very important that you choose your interviewees very well. I know the busier the person, the more information you can get from them, no? That's why I also check the questions very closely, because I want hopefully the interviewee to answer them completely and thoroughly, so that your study will have some meat. No, importante na when the results come out, the research will be very compelling and will contribute something to society. No? So when the sample is insufficient or not of good quality, then I usually ask my students or I give them suggestions, no, on who they can possibly interview and add more meat to their studies. So usually ina-add na lang yung maybe another 2 more interviews with people who I think could add more information and substance to the research being done. Actually, this is the most common reason. The 4th reason is the most common. So we have 3 reasons already, no? Lack of focus, use of jargon, insufficient sample, and this one is debatable, but the analysis lacks depth, no? Okay, how do you know if your analysis lacks depth? Number 1, you jump to conclusions kaagad, no? One finding lang, you jump agad to conclusion. Don't do that. You only don't conclude if it's not a general case, no? It would be a good conclusion if all the interviewees said that this is a reason why this happened. So maybe with that you can make a conclusion because your sample is bigger. But kung isa lang out of, let's say, 5 interviewees said this thing, it may not be a strong conclusion. Another reason the reason for making coding, no? When you look for common words which the interviewees use, it's very important that these words are related to your study. So if they're not, take them out, no? Because they will just cloud your judgment and they will just dilute your analysis, no? So look for strong words which can help make provide substance to your analysis. um, okay, another thing na mahirap sa qualitative analysis is um, putting categories. So when you analyze, there's just so many things that comes out, especially if your interviewees are very good, that when you classify them, some of these categories overlap, no? Um, so medyo unclear, no? So that is one problem, but that can be helped, no? That's where advisors come in to look, because we're looking from the outside, no? So what we do is we just uh, group together which categories can be grouped together and take out those which do not really provide substance to the research. So um, usually I tell my students to just classify at most 3 to 5 categories. So don't put too many categories, because number one, may hilo kami sa dami, and then number two, it will dilute your study. Number three, it will, you will lack focus, no? You go back to the lack of focus problem, no? Okay, sometimes some of the methods being used lack description, but sometimes that's also the fault of the advisor, because um, we have to check the methodology very clearly, and then this is usually used in cases where so for case studies, no? Case studies where they have to observe, um, usually for I've seen this done in when they have to do studies for indigenous people or indigenous tribes. If the sometimes the methods lack description, no? Kulang sa pag-describe. So paglabas ng results, the results are medyo messy, no? Topsy-turvy, watak-watak, because there was no strict methodology that was followed. And usually that's also the fault of the advisor, no? Because we did not really check properly, or we thought that the methodology being given was already no, tight. But the problem with qualitative is it can be fluid, no? Because you cannot really control your respondent, no? Especially if you're dealing with um, newer studies, no? So you cannot really control what they're going to say, how they're going to perform, how they're going to come out with the data. So the method being used may not be useful, but that can be remedied, you know. The method can be reorganized, refit, to make sure that it really answers your the researcher's statement of the problem. So when that happens, when the methodology lacks tightness and adequate description, what I do is just we just try to fix the methodology, and then the researcher has to do it again. Yeah, that's a big problem with the doing it again, because it's not very easy to contact your respondents, no? Another one would be data quality concerns. Um, this may happen if the researcher cheats, no? Or the interviewee is not so helpful. So the quality of your data may not be very good. Unfortunately, there's no other way around it. The researcher has to look for sources or interviewees who can provide quality answers. So when data quality concerns happen, we just tell them, you have to, or I could suggest people that could answer the questions for the researcher. But of course, all the legwork will have to be done by the researcher. Our role is just to give the recommendations and the names of the people who can help them, no? So so how many did I mention? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are about 6, no, common pitfalls to to qualitative analysis. So it's either lack of focus, use of jargon, insufficient sample. The most common is the analysis lacks depth, then the methods lack adequate description, and of course another common reason is the quality of the data is not so good. So the researcher has to work again. No? How is it done in a mixed method research? I think that would be better if I do another video for that, so I can also show you how quantitative analysis can complement qualitative analysis. So anyway, please subscribe. Please follow me on my Facebook, on my Twitter, and on my Instagram. And please subscribe to my channel. I'm Writer Coach Tony. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I was able to answer your question, Mr. Fernando Cartagena. Take care and have a nice day.